All right, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining my webinar. My name is Brandon Campbell, and I am a director on the business development team at Ephesoft. Over the next half hour, I'm going to review the new and enhanced intelligent character recognition capabilities of Ephesoft Transact for capturing handprint data. I'm going to cover the top 5 factors to consider when working on any digital transformation initiative that touches handwritten data and documents. And then I'm going to walk through a live demonstration for some behind the scenes looks at how we configure this type of project. Just a really quick reminder, if you just joined, please do ask questions in the Q&A window. I'm going to address as many possible live at the end of the session, and I can follow up by email for anyone I can't get to live. Now, anyone who thinks that handwritten data only exists on a fixed or standardized form hasn't ever really dug into a government process or worked on a non-fillable online form for an application somewhere in the commercial industry. Form variations and versions, poor scan quality, fax conversions, and more can all impact the layout of information that exists on that form. And when all of these factors come into play, templatized data extraction just does not cut it. And that's why we've added some capabilities into our product suite. Now, extrapolating from an AIM survey of about 300 respondents, more than a quarter of all organizations use forms and documents that contain handprint as a part of their key business processes. I mean, to me, in the year 2020, that's kind of insane. And these processes even include things that have been attempted to undergo some type of automation with tools like RPA systems or BPM applications. We think robots and then we think handprint, and something doesn't necessarily click there. Now, the public sector is one of the biggest culprits of handprint data process bottlenecks. And where constituents are concerned, most government functions involve form submissions. So whether we're looking at federal departments or state and local agencies, budget and technology adoption are definitely factors here. Think, for example, in this current time of the slashed operational budget of your local county in wake of the pandemic. Then think about processes that are going to be ongoing for the next year or two, like permit applications, information requests, benefits application, tax deferrals, and more. Your local government, the federal government, are dealing with limited staff, furloughs, and overall diminished work capacity, and they're going to be completely inundated with a manual data entry backlog for all of these constituent-driven requests. But the commercial world is not immune to the information black hole that is handprint data either. Think, for example, about insurance companies that accept claim forms from policyholders that are submitted with handwriting. Think about the healthcare space, and every time you've been to your primary care physician, having to fill out the updated insurance contact information form in the waiting room with all of the other miserable looking patients. Or, gosh forbid, if you had to be tested for COVID-19 or you've taken an antibody test. All the application forms that you're filling out and submitting, that information is crucial for things like tracing, for ongoing just basic records management, which means that it needs to be maintained in a digital searchable format. So it's everywhere, it slows processes, and it nearly always requires manual data entry. It's the bane of information and data managers' existence. Now, within Transact specifically, to give a quick snapshot for anyone unfamiliar with Ephesoft Transact as a capture tool, Transact is Ephesoft's flagship product. And this is the internal application workflow. It follows these basic steps. So content moves from the point of actual document capture or ingestion, either as a part of an external systems workflow or a standalone action, all the way through to the point, step here number 6, where processed documents and their associated metadata and index values are routed to their final destination or to the next step in the business process. And what's new and exciting in particular for Transact is what we've added to our data extraction capabilities. And that's primarily centered around intelligent character recognition and optical mark recognition. Now, with the release of Transact's 2020.1 feature pack, end users will be able to configure unstructured handprint data extraction rules and signature detection from within the Transact administrative UI at no additional cost. And later in the session, I'm going to be demonstrating just how the application captures handprinted data from a few variations of some state government forms. And I'm going to walk through how to create new rules for doing just that specifically. Now, just a really quick reminder here, since I'm going to be using the acronyms of these conversion mechanisms, optical mark recognition, colloquially referred to as OMR, captures data from form elements like checkboxes or multiple choice bubbles. It might not be the most exciting technology in the world, but it's a really big component of form data extraction. And then intelligent character recognition, or ICR, it converts images of hand-printed text to an editable and/or a searchable file format. And traditional ICR engines, they range in accuracy and server requirements. There are new cloud-based and machine learning trained ICR engines hitting the market on a fairly regular basis. So it's a broadening field at the moment. Now, I think that there are really 5 key elements to a successful digital transformation project where handprint data is concerned. So I want to dig into these before we get into the demonstration. First, you really need to consider the source of your content. So how are you receiving documents with handprint data? This is going to vary by industry and by process, but it's important to the overall workflow and the success or the accuracy rate of your automated data extraction project. Are documents coming in as faxes or emails? Are they coming into a centralized location as snail mail? Or are you getting pictures of hand-printed forms and letters being uploaded to a company portal from a snapshot on a mobile device? As more and more people are going to be forced and encouraged to work from home, content that's being captured from mobile devices and personal devices is going to surge, and we need to figure out how to deal with that content. Fortunately, with an application like Transact, we do support the ingestion of documents from all of these sources. And we even have a mobile application that can be embedded in your company's app via SDK or used natively to allow distributed capture in the field and on the fly. Now, the second factor to consider for any successful DX project that's going to include handprint documents are the security requirements of your organization or your industry as a whole. Are there requirements specific to accessing or integrating with public cloud applications? This is really important when you start to think about ICR. So if so, that could be a deal breaker for some of the machine learning crowdsourced cloud-only ICR tools like computer vision, for example. On the other hand, Transact's out-of-the-box ICR engine can be installed on-premise or leveraged in your own private cloud, so there is no need to send sensitive information or customer data outside of your organization's network and the firewalls to take advantage of the rich capabilities of ICR. So definitely take a look at whether or not it's even possible to access an external or public cloud for these types of workflows. Now, Transact utilizes key value or KV pairs to identify and extract information from unstructured documents. And I'm going to get into in the demonstration showing you exactly how this is set up here. And this means that the application is basically going to look for a particular pattern of text that represents the key. And then it's going to find the corresponding value based on the desired extraction field value's relationship to the key. And this approach eliminates the need to configure document type templates to actually extract data, and it can be applied to either machine print or handprint data. This also means that Transact has the ability to find snippets of handprint text, such as this is the value written in handprint, on a page using that KV pair logic, and we can send it out to a third-party ICR engine in the cloud, or then pull back that converted value. Just one thing to note about using a third-party ICR engine is that there could be additional cost associated with whatever vendor's tool you might be using. I know many ICR vendors provide, ICR providers charge based on a per field basis. But with Transact, like I mentioned, we're using an on-prem ICR engine. Recostar is the name of the tool, and it is embedded in the product, so there's no additional cost to you or your clients for using handprint extraction either on a per field or a per page basis. That's all embedded in the application. Now, the next thing to consider is going to be complexity and just variation in general. A lot of capture products are going to require you to create fixed forms or templates in order to extract handprint data from scanned documents. And if you have a project where you only have a single form and a single variation of that form, that might not be that big of a deal from a project configuration or management perspective. But what if there are historical variations of that form that are accessible to the public? Maybe the form gets updated each year or expanded. What if in the government space, the form varies state by state What if old versions of the form are embedded on websites somewhere that someone could find and send in? That kind of blows up the whole idea of templates. We can take, for example, these 3 state forms for tax exemption. They're all looking for the exact same information, but it's laid out and formatted completely differently. Then you have to consider the document source, which is kind of that first point I made, which ties into this, and the impact that that could have on the actual layout of the documents. If a form is captured on a mobile device, that could impact the aspect ratio of the digital image. When physical documents are scanned, they could be skewed or laid out incorrectly on a scanner bed, again, impacting actual zonal coordinates of a document. And the same holds true for distortions that take place when a document is faxed. If you're relying on a fixed area of the page to find handprinted information, your ability to scale in any true digital transformation project is going to be highly limited. Now, the fourth factor I'd like to consider, which I think is really important for any successful DX project, is going to be how you interact with and manage documents that have signatures. Signature detection can be manually intensive, time-consuming. It can slow down application processes across all industries. Let's take mortgage, for example. The Uniform Residential Loan Application form is typically a part of a large packet of loan-related documents that ranges in page length and complexity. I've seen mortgage packets up to like 1,000 pages. And validating that any borrower and co-borrower has signed is absolutely crucial to the process. It's a pretty basic thing. But when a human being enters the mix, they spend time flipping through the pages to find that one field just to give the packet the green light. Automating this step could save time and therefore money and expediting the human loan process. Or we can look at something like background investigation processes or human resources onboarding. Every single industry, every single company has some type of application or agreement process wherein people and companies are required to sign documents, forms, or letters of explanation and put some automated validation checks in place for these. These just ubiquitous tasks has enormous time-saving potential. And I think it should be a key element to consider when you're looking at any DX project where capture and potentially handwritten information is involved. And then last but not least, this is something that I think is often overlooked. I think you need to make sure you understand whether the relevant data is machine printed, handwritten, presented with optical marks like radio toggles or checkboxes, or some combination thereof, and make sure you're getting what you need and not necessarily more or less. And that seems intuitive, but I often have project requests where a company or an agency, they want to have every single field on a form or every piece of information on a document extracted. And when I ask why, or when I ask about the purpose of the information downstream or how it might be used in a workflow or saved long term, there's just no answer. I think it's important to limit the scope of your project to make sure you're only including relevant data, whether that data is a signature in a contract, a checkbox on a form confirming that you need an additional form, or a hand-printed piece of information. And taking that into consideration, your project timeline and your cost of implementation are going to greatly benefit. So to recap, items to add to your DX initiative playlist are: consider the content sources, look into security requirements for data transmission outside of your organization's network or firewall, look for complexity and variety of forms and documents. Don't just assume there's one and it only comes in one particular way. Single out workflows that require signature validation and get a solid understanding of the OCR, ICR, and OMR data extraction requirements as they relate to the overall business process. All right, so without further ado, I would like to get into a demonstration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this screen and I'm going to move my browser over. And what I have here in front of me is the Transact user interface, where I can see options to access as an administrator or access as an operator. And what I have is a couple of sample documents. They're actually the documents that I showed in the webinar earlier as a part of the PowerPoints, where I have just some sample forms filled out, a couple of different variations of it, totally different layout, but they're all looking for the same basic information. And I have a project created that's set up to capture that information regardless of how it appears on the documents. So what I'm going to do is, as an operator, I'm going to select this Upload New Documents button, which is going to take me to a screen that allows me to drag and drop some files in for manual upload into the system to be processed. Now, this is a process that I am starting manually. Let me make sure I grab the right project. I have tax exemption forms here, and I'm going to start the batch. Now, I'm doing this manually, but typically we see this process integrated as a part of an overall larger workflow, or integrated with a bot, or integrated as a part of some sort of cobbled together workflow that includes monitoring an email inbox source and routing the information out to a content management system or an ERP system. So more often than not, we're just one small piece in a larger process. Now, since I uploaded those, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to my batch instance management screen. And basically what that is as an administrator, it allows me to get a snapshot of batches of documents that are being run or are being processed by the application. And if you'll recall, in one of my earlier slides, let me do a quick refresh here. In one of my earlier slides, I had a outline workflow that had 6 steps talking about the internal application's workflow, what happens when documents are processed. This is just a really nice representation of what those steps are, and it can show me where the documents are in process. So at this point, the documents are being held up in validation. And one of the reasons they're being held up in validation is because when building the project, I configured it so that all documents had to stop in validation for a human to review it. We can go ahead and define confidence thresholds to ensure that document processing pauses or can continue along based on the confidence score of individual values of individual documents as they're assigned. So I'm going to open up this batch that I just ran, and what it's going to do is it's going to launch a validation screen. Oops, and I went ahead and blocked that pop-up unnecessarily. So let me go ahead and do it again. And it's going to take me to the validation user interface, which is going to show me a couple of things about the documents. So I have here the 3 sample documents on the left-hand side of the screen. I have the fields that were extracted here in the middle panel of the screen. And then I have a snapshot or a preview of that image and where the information came from on the right. So this particular form, if I hover over the organization name, I can see here that Adopt Pet Shelter was grabbed as the legal name for this particular application for sales state tax exemption. And if I click the button Validate, it's going to take me to the next field or document within the batch of documents I just processed that needs my attention. But before I get to that, I'm going to highlight a couple of other things. What we have set up here is to capture some information from the checkboxes as well. So I made sure I understood that this is a charitable donation. And if I click on the field for signature present, it's going to automatically take me to the next page to highlight the area on the page where it found that information from and verify, yes, in fact, this application form has been signed. Now again, for a 2-page document and 1 single instance, this doesn't seem like a big deal for a person to take a look at and grab that information or confirm, yes, it's been signed. But when you're looking at this type of information at scale, it can be a huge time saver, especially when we consider that every single state has a different type of form, a different layout to request this information. So in this case here, I can see here that I just slightly missed a space between society and of. So I can simply enter the space here, select validate, and again, I'll move on to the next page or the next document within this batch. Here I've got the Lexington Humane Society, looks good. I can see that's a charitable organization and the signature has been present and detected, so I can validate that as well. So it's a fairly simple process for an end user, a human, to eyeball this and say, yes, this is correct, or no, this is captured incorrectly. And I can point and click at different areas of the page in order to update this information. Now, I only grabbed a handful of fields as a part of this overall project. So what I want to do is I can go through and validate the rest of this information and exit out of here. Now, what I want to go to is I want to get back into the administrative screen, and I want to show you what it looks like to actually add an additional field to the process, to the workflow, to what we're extracting from the documents. So as an administrator, I'm going to take a look at my batch class management screen. And in Transact, we simply call projects batch classes. So when you hear that, that's what I'm referring to. And I'm going to open up my state tax project. And I can see here on the left-hand side of the screen with the drop-down menu, I've got my document types that have been trained for this project. In this case, I only have a single document type. It's a tax exemption form. And if I open up this document type, I can see the actual fields that were trained for extraction as well. Now, what I want to do is I simply want to add a new field. And I know in these previous samples that I was working with, if I open one back up, all of the documents require a federal employee identification number as a part of the application process. So I'm going to go ahead and create a field that extracts that information as well. So I'm going to re-maximize this screen, and I'm going to simply add, and I'm going to call this the FEIN, and this is the Fed Employment field number. There we go. So I can call it whatever I want to. It's going to be a string data type. If there's any particular patterns, I can apply them here. Similarly, where I mentioned earlier about forcing validation for certain fields, I can ensure that this document will always stop in validation to have a human eyeball it. And I can make some changes here. So I'm going to apply this, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up this particular field to actually create rules for how I want the information to be captured. So I'm going to drag and drop a sample document here, so I can simply point and click to configure this. And this is how I'm going to configure that key value pair. If you recall earlier in the webinar, I mentioned using the application uses a combination of things to find information on a page in an unstructured document. And in that case, it's assigning information to find a key, and then assigning information to find the value. So this just gives me a good visual representation to do that. So in this case, I'm going to say, I'm going to use this box to find the value. It's the federal employment identification number. And then this red box is going to represent the value that I want to pull back. So I've got value here, and then I can define the regular expression or the pattern for what I want it to look for. So one of the things I can do to define a regular expression is to actually just write out, I want to find the letters FEIN, and when it finds the letters FEIN, then go ahead and look in the location to the right of that value to say, all right, now find the pattern represented by that. And we can make that pattern as broad or as narrow as we want. Now, in this case, I know that there's a couple of different types of ways that FEIN can be represented. Maybe it's written out, maybe it's just captured as this acronym. So I can broaden that and expand it. And then the value that I want to find, or the information I want to find, if I use dot plus as my regular expression, it's just telling the application, just find everything and pull it back here. I'm going to define that this is going to be either machine print, a hand print or machine print. And then I want to remove the lines because I don't want to also capture information on the lines. I'm going to test, I'm going to validate my regular expression to verify that it's an appropriate expression, and then I'm going to test this rule. And what will happen when I test it is that it's going to find the key, it's going to translate this snippet of text from handprint to machine print, and it's going to show me the value that it pulled back for this particular field, and it's going to show me the color code that it pulled back from it, as well as the coordinates that it found this actual information on the document. Now, once again, it doesn't matter where this information exists on the page. We're not defining a specific zonal area or location. We're just looking at the relationship between these two values. So I can simply say, all right, I want to apply this key value pair. I'm again going to apply it. I'm going to close this out. And just like that, if I open up my document type again, open up my page, I have a new rule that can be applied, and I can widen or broaden specifically what I'm looking for when I'm defining that. So being able to quickly create new rules to add to a project is pretty straightforward and pretty simple, and we're very excited about the capabilities there. All right, now just about up time, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition over to the Q&A window, and I'm going to answer as many questions as possible here, and I'll definitely be following up by email for anyone I can't get to. So I did have a question about training content on emails. Yeah, absolutely, we can capture information from emails. So if you have specific details on the header, the sender, if there's any metadata about the email itself native to the file, we can pull out information from the email. So that's definitely possible. And we can do the same thing for email attachments. So we can separate that, get it from the body of email, get information, text data from the actual attachment, classify them as different types of documents. That's all a part of it. I see I have another question here about custom classification rules. Yeah, absolutely. There are a ton of different ways that we can apply classification logic to the application in order to create or to build the document ontology. So I can share more specific detail after the fact if you'd like to follow up with me, Cheyenne, and I can give you some specifics on custom classification rules. The name of the ICR engine, someone asked again. We're using RecoStar embedded in the application. So that's RecoStar ICR. Once again, we can call third-party ICR engines as a part of this workflow, but free and included in the application is the RecoStar ICR engine. I did have a question here about whether or not I can set up whether or not each form has to be set up separately. So step one is to identify all of the different forms and templates and then variations within a particular template. So yes, we can set up each form, like if you have an employment verification form and then you have a background investigation form. No matter how many variations there are of each of those, that doesn't matter to us. We would still just consider that one form. So you do not have to create templates for the different variations of the forms that you're working with. That's the beauty of being able to configure this for handprint and key value pairs. Can this application be compatible to an RPA application like UiPath? Yes, absolutely. So we are technology partners with most of the major RPA vendors, which means we have activities out of the box available for UiPath that can be downloaded from UiPath Go, VBOs for automation anywhere. If you're, or I'm sorry, with Blue Prism, we have really rich suite of web services available, which is how we integrate with automation anywhere. If you're working with Nintex, formerly Foxtrot, we have joint customers there using Transact in conjunction with the workflow and RPA tool. So yes, we often work very closely with RPA systems. I had a question about what version of Transact this is available in. So the most recent version of Transact is 2020.1, and we'll very shortly be releasing just later this month a service pack for 2020.1, which will include this capability in it. All right, so I have a question here about when the upgrade occurs, will machine text extraction rules automatically updated to the handprint machine rule? No, so that would be a manual update. So if you have an existing project and an existing configuration, this option from a key value extraction pair configuration will be added. So you could update any existing workflows if you want to add to it with the new logic that's available in any upgrade. All right, I think I'm slightly over on time. I'm going to have to wind this down, but please know that if you sent a question or you have a chat, I will definitely follow up via email. We'll get someone to connect with you as soon as humanly possible. So thank you all so much for joining, for your time and your attention. I really appreciate it, and I'll be following up with you. Please feel free to reach out to me directly as well, and I can point you in the right direction or get your questions answered myself. Thank you, everybody.